the ethos was what brought most of us into the space, either ethos or application. And it really was like about disrupting the financial system. And now I'm sitting here and I'm like, there's a chance we might actually do it. This thing might happen, might not be in the way that like all of us thought in the beginning. It might not be the way that all of us sort of love the most, but there is a world where this truly disrupts the future of like the financial rails in a way that I think we all hoped for, but maybe nobody really believed was going to happen, at least not in the time frame that it has, which is amazing.
Hey everybody, Tanner here with WAGMI Ventures. On today's episode, we have Bryan Pellegrino, co-founder and CEO at LayerZero Labs. For anyone who's new, this is the WAGMI Ventures podcast, where we do snapshots with interesting builders and founders from across Web3. Check out wagmiventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. But for now, let's get into it with Bryan at LayerZero Labs. All right. Hey, everybody. I'm here today with Bryan Pellegrino, co-founder and CEO at LayerZero Labs. Bryan, what's up? How are you doing today?
Tanner, thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I'm excited to chat. To start, in doing some research about you, fascinating story, right? I would love to kind of start really just by learning a little bit more about your path and what brought you to Web3, because you actually started in a very different field of poker. Is that right?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, like I touched my first Bitcoin in 2010, right? So all of the poker community actually had very early exposure into crypto in April 15th, 2011, Black Friday, as it was known in poker. All of the online poker sites were banned in the US. So online poker was banned. Most of us were like out of a job. All of our money was frozen in these accounts. And in that happening, all of the payment processors went down. So PayPal, NetTeller, Moneybooker, Skrill, all gone. All the things that people regularly use to move money between the different poker sites at the time. And so from that day forward, basically immediately after, all of the kind of shady poker sites that were left started to adopt Bitcoin to move money between them. So they took deposits in Bitcoin. They allowed it as like a payments medium. Kind of the earliest product market fit for Bitcoin was a lot of this gambling related stuff. And then from there, 2013 was when I really heavily got involved, running racks and racks of miners in my garage and, everything, ETH-ICO, all of that stuff. And then, fast forward, here we are now almost 11 years later. So it's been kind of a long journey, have been full-time since kind of end of 2016, but have definitely been involved and adjacent to the space for a very long time.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. You really don't come across people that have that early of exposure to, I guess, Bitcoin to start, but I think that's a really interesting kind of introduction. So can you unpack what LayerZero does and, what kind of offerings are available?
Yeah, LayerZero at its core is end-to-end messaging, right? That's really what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to enable communication between blockchains. The way that I've always thought about it, and we think about it internally, is you go back pre kind of internet stack, right? You have all of these execution environments. And if you wanted to run, like take your data and run it on a program, you would literally need to like take a floppy disk and, go from DARPA to Stanford and like run it physically. And then we invented this cool stack of the internet. And all of a sudden you were able to sort of connect all of these disparate execution environments and start to do like some really interesting things. And kind of the base primitive of that internet is a packet, right? So you really have just kind of, if you think about a packet on the internet, it's just two computers. You have compute, an array of bytes, and then compute on the other side. So like generate these bytes, move the bytes, and then like ingest them, figure out what to do. And that's how we're talking today. It's how we watch Netflix, how we do all of the cool things that we do on the internet. And that should sound really familiar because right now what we have with blockchains and have had for a very long time is like disparate execution environments that have no way to communicate. So LayerZero at its core really is arbitrary contract invocation with a bytes array. You invoke a contract on one chain to generate these bytes, move the bytes, and invoke a contract on the other chain to do something. And what people do with that has been really awesome to see and creative. It's everything from bridging, lock up a token here, unlock a token there, burn and mint, to crazy things that people are doing with NFTs and games and in all of these different DeFi primitives and moving state data around. And so really it is meant to be kind of that communication layer between contracts on chains. And it really allows you to send any arbitrary array of bytes that you can generate from one chain to another. So you can do anything that you can do in a smart contract, you can do over LayerZero across chains.
Perfect. Okay. So there's a couple of things I want to jump in on everything you just said, but I think first I'd love to go back a little bit to the beginning and really just ask, like, what was it like setting out to tackle that problem with the infrastructure and kind of environment that existed back at the start? And maybe as part of that, like, what were one or two challenges your teams had to really solve along the way that has made the biggest difference?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of interesting. People see kind of where we're at now, and they I think there's this lens of like, oh, these guys are, whatever it is, all this VC alignment, all like, we didn't even plan to start a company, right? We're three technologists. My two co-founders, we were roommates in college. We've been building together for like 16 years. We built multiple companies together. We did academic research together. I've done a million things that failed. Like, we were just playing around in the space. And so we had just been asked, when the first on-chain DEXs came, IDEX, Ether Delta, those things, we were asked to create some trading strategies for this hedge fund. And so we started writing some on-chain strategies for them and realized that nobody had any clue what they were doing. And so we realized this was kind of an interesting emerging space before, MEV really was MEV at the time. And so really it was, ARB, Triangle ARB, all of these different things, but it was just like pure speed. It was the ability to just propagate messages into the mempool faster than anybody, get preferred execution, all of that. And so we were stripping apart Geth and rewriting it for custom node discovery. We're doing all of this stuff. And then one day we just started to see transactions pop up in blocks that were zero gas paid and perfect block position. We were like, oh, the miners are colluding against us. Like, I guess it's a rigged game now. Like, can't do this anymore. And so, this was before Flashbots came in and kind of commoditized this entire process. But at the time, it was just like, if the miners are colluding, there's literally nothing you can do. And so Binance Smart Chain was really taking off at the time. And you were hearing every day, you were kind of being inundated with like more messages than Ethereum, more volume than Ethereum, all of this stuff. And so that was very interesting. Like, for having been around a very long time, like, other chains existed, but nobody really used them. Nobody did anything on them. And so we started to think like, okay, what could you do if you had this execution environment that's like, you have Ethereum that's expensive, secure, but now you have this other environment that's like extremely cheap. Like, you probably want to treat everything there as like entirely ephemeral, but like, what could you do with that? So we actually started to build a toy game just for ourselves, for fun, to see what we could do. And so it was a game. I mean, it was a very stupid game, right? It was like, you open up packs of gladiators on BSC, they fight and die. And if you like win 10 matches in a row, then you're like freed from the arena. And then you would mint a permanent NFT on Ethereum. And that would be the thing that had like lasting state. And so everything on BSC was entirely ephemeral, fast, cheap gameplay, all of that stuff. And then you mint this permanent NFT. So this was like, again, this was just us doing this for ourselves. And then we realized very quickly that like, oh, you can't actually do this without a central coordinator like triggering events on both chains. We're like, well, that sucks. Like, that's entirely centralized. It entirely defeats the purpose. And so we were like, okay, but like bridges exist. So surely somebody solved this problem. And so we set out kind of looking into existing bridges. And frankly, we're like horrified. The bridges at the time, like truly horrified. And so then we're like, okay, like this is insane. And so then we set out to build actually a better bridge. It was a precursor to Stargate, really focused on native assets over wrapped assets, and in this concept of instant guaranteed finality, which we thought that the end applications would need to have, and that all of the volume would be driven kind of at the application layer. And quickly realized in building that, like, oh, we're still needing to reinvent like the transport layer, and that very clearly is like the generalizable problem, and that kind of became LayerZero, right? So it was just kind of long and winding road of problem, and just kind of chasing what we've always done, and just following problems that are like very interesting to us. And then once we got to the transport layer, it was like, okay, like how do you build a thing that isn't just this, it doesn't just look like it does the job. It is a centralized thing. Like the things we indexed on were entirely immutable, censorship resistant, and permissionless. Like those were the only things that we cared about in terms of building the stack. And then you had to make it actually useful for applications now and all of that. But like you had to be able to hit those three things to make a protocol that's going to kind of stand the test of time. And that brought us where we are today.
Love it. Fascinating journey. Okay. So, earlier you were talking about some of the use cases that you've seen. And I think I'm curious, I guess the question would be if things continue to progress as well as they are, what's different in Web3, or really like what are some second order effects that you guys have noticed or at least paying attention to of, what becomes different for everyone if you guys continue to succeed, right?
Yeah, I think the end goal for us, and people always think I'm joking, but I'm dead serious, right? They're like, where do you see LayerZero in like 5 to 10 years? Literally, I hope that nobody knows about us or talks about us ever in the way that, modern web devs don't need to think about like TCP/IP or like the OSI model, right? Like these things just don't. They're not part of a developer's journey these days. For most things, you just want to come and build an application, and most people don't need to think about that layer. Like the goal for us is to abstract execution environment and to abstract a lot of this stuff from the end user and enable the developer to create that experience. So one of the first when we launched, I kind of released this video which got us a lot of traction, which was like, here is the current experience of like trying to simply like swap asset A on chain X to asset B on chain Y, and like the median time for all of the solutions at the time was probably like 25 minutes, and it was like something like 40 or 50 clicks. It was insanity. And with LayerZero, it was like a single click that abstracted all the gas. So the user clicked once, they signed one transaction, paid gas in a bundle on source, and the whole flow got executed all the way across. And so that was like the earliest iteration of this goal for us, which is like the end user shouldn't care. And like the application should care what chains are on in the environment. But the end user is just like, they just want to pay a fixed cost and have the experience. And the underlying chains themselves need to like add enough value to that it makes sense. And you see this today with everything. Like DeFi has found very solid product market fit. Stable coins have found very solid product market fit. You look now on the banking side of things, right? Like the banks don't care. They don't share ethos. Like every bank right now, every single one, and most monetary authorities in the world, all of these, they're all working on their own permission chains. They're all doing this. Like they don't care at all about the ethos of the space. They don't care about, any of that. What they care about is it actually useful to them and their end customer? Will it save them money? Will it be a more efficient way to issue digital assets? And then the knock-ons of everything, all the work that's done in Bitcoin and Ethereum and everywhere else is that like a lot of these structures will start to merge, and you'll have, you will have some of these things in permissionless environments. And so I think the end goal is how do you build something that has real long-term viability to the ultimately the end developer who's carrying that on to the consumer. So I hope what the world looks like is that, the users really just focus on the action that you're taking, that you can take, create experience for customers where the customer doesn't care. The underlying is a fabric that adds inherent value to the developer and the customer, but it's not something they think about in their day to day. And so our goal really is like abstracted that away for the developer.
Love it. Okay. So let's turn and talk a little bit about kind of Web3 writ large here, where, my first question was really going to be like, what do you view as the biggest obstacles to kind of mass Web3 adoption? And sort of linking it to that thought of really like the invisibility or the hoped for invisibility of LayerZero, where like, it won't be something that it will be so ubiquitous or so usefully ubiquitous that it's not part of the usual. It won't be seen as something radical, right? I'm curious if you have any broader thoughts about kind of what else is standing in the way to ubiquity for Web3 adoption.
Yeah, it's a question that I get a lot, and I probably have like a different answer than most. Having been here for a very, very, very long time at this point, like if you went back even 3 to 4 years ago, go back 4 years and ask me, if we'll be where we are today, like I would have put it at a decade plus out. So like people always want adoption to be faster and consumer adoption to come. Like I actually think it has been insane how quickly like things like S&P 500 companies holding crypto on their balance sheets to, JP Morgan running a 500-person team and building their own blockchain. Like all this stuff just seemed insane not that long ago. $100+ billion of stable coins living on chain, Uniswap hitting like $2 trillion in overall volume. You have DeFi primitives. Now we have options on chains. We have perps on chain. We have, again, trillions of dollars of spot volume trading on chain. Lending protocols are something that are immensely useful in so many different use cases. You're seeing emerging markets, whether it's Turkey or Argentina, all these places starting to pick up adoption of a bunch of whether it's stable coins or whatever it is to like offset the fluctuations in vol and like their local currencies. Like all of this stuff is stuff that was fiction to us not that long ago. And so like, would I like to see it go faster? And do I want end consumer adoption? Like, yes, but I actually think like the pace that things are moving at is incredible. And generally I'm pretty happy with the way things are moving. So like what's going to need to happen? We're going to need to have more scale. We're going to need to be able to have developers like obviously need to find a way to limit the amount of hacks in the space that are happening. Like security surfaces are just still massive. I think there's a ton of smaller things, but everything is really iterative for the most part. And you talk like, I like crypto because there's a really interesting balance. And I'll give a couple of examples. You have like the ultra opportunists who are like here now. The question is like, how do I make money right now? What do I do right now today? And then you have like, I love Ellie from Starkware because I'm always talking. He's telling me about like the new research they're doing. And I'm like, oh, it sounds amazing. Like, when is that coming? And he's like 8 years. I'm just like, what? Like 8 years? Like, it's like so funny. He's taking like such a long-term view to things. But then you have people who are even like more extreme. I spent a dinner talking to Justin Drake about one-shot signatures and just like what that could do. I was like, this is one of the most interesting ideas I've spoken about and spent time thinking about for like a very long time. I was like, when do you think this will be useful in application in like Ethereum? And he's like, yeah, like maybe like 30 years from now. And so there are just like levels. There's levels to that side of the long-term horizon lens. And what I love about this space is that we do have those people who are so like passionately pursuing things on a really long-term, like, it's something that they might like solve in their lifetime, but it's going to be like on the mid to tail end of that. And that's crazy to me, but it's amazing. And so, no, I think we're doing all of the right things. I think we have the mixes of the right people who are working on like commercial applications now versus working on like, how do you make this really like something that's forever? And I just think that's incredibly rare and super important. So I'm happy with where we're at in adoption. I think we're just continuously moving in the right direction.
Love it. Okay. So next question would be, you mentioned you like the pace. You've mentioned, you actually answered a few questions of what I was going to ask in that one thought. But beyond pace, like from your vantage point as a founder, what do you view as some of the more exciting trajectories for Web3?
Yeah. So I think there's two sides. There's trajectories in terms of application. There's trajectories in terms of like what is actually interesting technology-wise. So technology-wise, like I think there's no question that zero knowledge stuff at the moment is probably the most exciting thing happening within the space. I think I think we've gone through cycles where there's always something really interesting, and go back kind of a year or two ago. And I was like, listen, outside the problem that, we're working on, nothing has gotten me like very excited. And I was a huge skeptic of ZK stuff when it comes to interoperability, to messaging in general. I spent a lot of time sort of arguing with Dan Bonnet, and just in general about a lot of this. But I think the broad applications to what ZK can provide in terms of just compression in general makes a huge, and yes, like privacy component is interesting. A lot of this stuff is interesting, but purely from the compression side, I think is one of the most interesting and impactful things that is happening at the moment. I mean, I think state bloat is a problem in a lot of different structures. So I think the ZK stuff is very interesting. From the application side, like, listen, again, I think iteratively we're doing all of the things that need to be done. I think the largest applications are still continuing to churn just an unbelievable amount of volume. It is very clear that there is real market for what they're providing, and that, again, you can just see it in all of the metrics, whether it's Uniswap's growth, whether it's stablecoin growth, all of this. I think the most interesting or surprising thing to me, again, is more on the the institutional side, the banking segment, I thought it would be so far out before that was really considered. But there's a world where like bonds leapfrog infrastructure. There's a world where a bunch of asset issuance does. There's in more than that. Again, I thought, okay, there's a world, but like they're going to stay entirely permission to permission chains, and they're just going to have this, their own database that is a little bit more resilient, I guess. But no, a lot of them are talking about like, how do they open up to permissionless structures? How do you do this on global scale? And like those conversations are interesting. I'm not sure what will actually come of that and what the end game impact will be. And again, I still see it as kind of probably years away before you see that really rolling out in production. But I think it's interesting to think that what we started, thinking about so long ago, like I remember. And in, the very earliest days for me, like just shit posting on Bitcoin Talk, and everybody, everybody who got into the time was very hard libertarian skew for the most part. Like the ethos was what brought most of us into the space, either ethos or application. And it really was like about disrupting the financial system. And now I'm sitting here and I'm like, there's a chance that we might there's a chance we might actually do it. This thing might happen. It might not be in the way that like all of us thought in the beginning. It might not be the way that all of us sort of love the most, but there is a world where this truly disrupts the future of like the financial rails in a way that I think we all hoped for, but maybe nobody really believed was going to happen, at least not in the time frame that it has, which is amazing.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay. So Bryan, a couple last questions here for you. If you could kind of time machine back to the beginning of maybe just LayerZero journey, I'm curious, what would your advice be to your earlier self, kind of knowing what you know now about, I mean, you had experience before, but I think I'm trying to get it here, like, what crypto specific founder advice would you have that maybe would have been useful had someone imparted it to you at the beginning of the LayerZero journey?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, listen, our journey has been as far right tail as humanly possible for the most case. And, what would I impart? Okay. I think the biggest thing I would do differently if I was doing it, I have a ton I can talk about on fundraising and all of that, especially like for us, literally when we raised our round at we raised 6.4 million kind of early on. And we were like, that is the last money we will ever raise. Like we had zero intention to ever do another raise, to ever do anything else. And here we are, much later having done multiples more. But I think the biggest thing is when we launched, like the space is so fickle in terms of sort of narrative and alignment, like so fickle. I remember Kobe gave me this amazing piece of advice early on, which was like, when you're launching, like you should write a refutation article, right? Lido did this early. I think they did an amazing job of it. And it's like, listen, here is like the state of the world in implementation, and it's imperfect now, but here's like the end state. Here is what we're shooting for. And for us, we thought, we looked at every other messaging protocol that existed and said, like, there's no way this will work. Either won't work in EVM or it is basically entirely centralized, right? In the form of contracts are fully upgradable. They can rug the end application at any time. You have some middle chain where like every application on every paired chain is just inherently like trusting authority delegation from this, like all of these issues that were sort of pervasive in every structure. And we said, listen, again, the things that we cared about were permissionless, immutable, censorship resistant. And so it's like, we build this thing that has entirely mutable endpoints, cannot ever change. Every application has the ability to have complete control over their own security, completely permissionless, such that anybody can come in and provide, anybody can run infrastructure, anybody can play that role. It is like literally you can build on LayerZero and never touch or interact with LayerZero at all, right? We don't matter in terms of LayerZero Labs. We're not a part. It is a protocol that will exist until the end of time or until Ethereum makes breaking changes with or without us, and entirely censorship resistant in a way that like others just aren't, like complete non-sorter enforcement, really adhering to like the ethos of the things that we cared about in the space. But we just launched it. We're like, okay, we're going to launch this thing. We think it meets all of the criteria for what a protocol should look like. And what it allowed by not making that refutation article, by not spending the time to like go through and sort of pre-debate all of these things, it allowed people to just take the current implementation. Like imagine the launch Ethereum and look at the validator set in the earliest days compared to like the validator set now and just be like, oh, well, this thing sucks, right? Like,
right.
it wasn't our goal at the time ever to like own the validation layer. We want to build the transport layer where the validation methodology can evolve. And we've seen that happen. We saw like it started with a simple TSS, and then Chainlink came on, and then Google came on, and then Polyhedra came on, which is like an entire ZK Lite client doing like full ETH consensus. So like this has started to evolve. We'll see more and more groups go into that. And like that was the point. That's what a permissionless structure should be. But what people saw are, hey, this thing, is starting with this TSS, and like that sucks, and it's not decentralized enough. And we're like, we agree, like, come and build the thing that will do that, right? We're building the structure so that you can do that. And I think it really, really just alignment wise, like made it very difficult from our end of just like, we were fighting this battle that wasn't even the battle that we chose to follow. We're fighting something that to us didn't matter at all. And so, yeah, I think that is the biggest thing that I would change is I think a lot of people early on saw that, sort of got jaded and overlooked like the underlying of the protocol. And again, now fast forward, adoption wise, everything else wise, like we're incredibly happy with where things are, but I think it just made life way harder than it needs to be. And like, there were just so many conversations. So messaging wise, I think it just matters to really, really be as transparent as humanly possible and get across like what you're trying to do in the trade-offs and why you built things the way that you built. Like, I think people care about that stuff, and I don't think we did it enough.
Fascinating. Yeah, I think that's terrific advice. So Bryan, last question here. What's your team working on right now, and what's the best way for people to follow along on the journey?
Yeah, I mean, what we're working on right now is I can't say like too much about what we're doing, but like we really have been heads down for a long time. It's been 18 months since we've launched. We have learned a lot in 18 months. And the next like 6 months, we're going to be shipping a lot. So, I mean, we have put a huge amount of time and effort into some of the things that we're going to be releasing. We're super, super excited about them internally. We'll all be sort of coming out soon. So we're very, very excited internally, like very big couple of months ahead, which is awesome. I think when you spend a lot of time on technology and our sort of an internal culture of shipping quickly, it becomes hard as things take longer than you want them to. I think everybody is excited to see some of these things in the world, but we're really, I don't know, couldn't be happier with kind of where things are there. Yeah. And then how people can follow along, LayerZero, the Twitter, LayerZero_labs is the primary Twitter. Obviously, you can follow me on Primordial AA, but I'm maybe less of an interesting follow. Shit post too much and, post technical commentary a decent amount, but it'll definitely be a mixed bag. But yeah, I mean, find us on Telegram, Discord, Twitter. Twitter is definitely where we live the most.
Perfect. Bryan, thank you so much. Super excited to see everything coming out in the next 6 months. And yeah, really appreciate your time. So have a great rest of your week here and take care.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. See you, Bryan.